In Less Than 3D, we're going to look at how prices of tangible goods are determined. A tangible good is a car, a computer, a laptop, something physical. And something that's physical to build, it inherently creates this idea of capacity. A factory in the short run can only produce so many cars at a given moment in time because there's only so many people that can populate the production line. There's only so many cars that can be built in a 24-hour day at a given factory. So tangible good supply really is, in my opinion, a vertical line in the short run when demand is high. And a great example of this is vehicles coming out of the pandemic. Computer chips were interrupted. The supply chains for computer chips were interrupted, and only so many cars could be built during the pandemic. And so there was this huge demand for cars because people weren't buying anything. They weren't buying cars during the pandemic. They come out of the pandemic, they have all this money saved up from all the stimulus that was created, and they need a car to go back to work, maybe, right? And so you have this high demand for vehicles, and the prices skyrocketed. So the problem with upward sloping supply for tangible goods is that it kind of ignores this idea of time. Because a tangible good, especially if it's a complex good, like an electric vehicle, takes time to assemble and put together with the given factories and whatnot, the given number of factories, the given number of production workers and machinery that are in these factories. So the upward sloping line ignores this time component. Now, market supply, in my opinion, can be upward sloping because as the price goes up, factories will turn on production lines. Maybe when the price is low, they only have one production line going. But if prices are high, they'll turn on a second or a third production line, right? So I can see the supply curve upward sloping. But for a given car company, for the most part, I think the supply curve is a vertical line. Because what happens is that car companies forecast demand 3 months from now. And so they build a bunch of cars to meet that demand in 3 months, right? So there's this time component. Now, 3 months from now, there's X number of cars available for sale. And those cars are available for sale for no matter what the price is. So in my opinion, that makes the supply of tangible goods a vertical line. Now, the more complex the production is, I think the more vertical that supply curve is. Now, for very simple tangible goods, that's probably not the case. But for like an electric vehicle, I think it's definitely the case. And what firms do is they manage inventory. When firms have lots of inventory, they don't really want to lower their price. What they do is they provide incentives so they can keep the expectation of their price where it's at. And a good example is Samsung phones and Samsung TVs during the Super Bowl a few years back. I remember the ad that Samsung ran at the time. And what they were doing is they're trying to keep their Samsung phone price expectations at whatever it was, maybe $1,000, right? So instead of just saying we're going to lower our Samsung phones to $500, 50% discount, if you buy a Samsung phone at full price, we'll give you a free Samsung TV. What they're really doing is they're discounting the TV and the phone, 50%, because maybe the TV is $1,000 and maybe the Samsung phone is $1,000. And by giving away the free TV, instead of spending $2,000 for the two, right? You're spending 1,000 for the two. And so essentially it's a 50% discount for both, right? Samsung doesn't want to change the expectations. They don't want you to change your expectation of what their prices are. The price is the price. They want that expectation to be maintained. And they do that with this illusion of these marketing campaigns, right? These incentive programs. And this is an example of how supply and demand work in the real world. It also provides a theoretical framework for macroeconomics, for Keynesian economics, that assumes prices are sticky in the short run. Prices sticky in the short run does not mean that demand and supply are not at work. They are. And this is an example of how they work when firms have this desire to keep the expectations of their prices at what is called list price. So in this problem, a firm manufactures the Wenzig. Now, Wenzig is just a German name for small, I think. It is a tiny automobile that is 8.2 feet long. It's fictional, by the way. 5.4 feet wide and 4.8 inches tall. 4.8 feet tall. The base model gets 58 miles per gallon and has a sticker price or list price of $46,140. Now, your price is going to be different than mine. For a typical month during an economic expansion with economic growth at 2.5% and inflation at 2.1%, really nice numbers for central planners. This is your estimated monthly market demand and supply. Now, notice supply here is a vertical line. The car company has produced 1,084 cars for the current level of demand, right? Demand under normal economic conditions. Now, the question is asking for the quantity of Wenzigs that your company supplies each month. Well, that's just 1,084. There's nothing to solve there, right? The amount of cars that you have available for sale are 1,084, right? You're making 1,084 cars a month with normal demand. And part of that is desired inventory levels. You don't want to be sold out. You don't want to have empty car lots. So when the economy is normal, 2.5% growth and inflation is 2.1%, you want to produce, a certain number of cars. So you can sell 1,084 each month, maintaining an inventory, a normal inventory level, number of cars at your car lots, at your dealerships throughout the United States, right? Now, if one car dealership is low inventory and another car dealership is high in inventory, then you can use a truck to transport cars from one dealership to the other, right? So the goal here is to maintain a normal number of cars in the lot. You don't want empty shelves. You also don't want shelves that are overflowing into the street, right? Because that tells consumers nobody wants your car. So you want your car lot to be semi-full, right? Basically, you want parking spots for your customers to come in and park, and then they can look at the cars in the lot, right? So the quantity supplied here is really easy to figure out. It's just what it is, right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to copy the demand curve to Desmos, and I'm going to change down here. I got to edit the scale here. I got to change the y-axis to a maximum of, say, 100,000 because the intercept is 89,500. So I'm going to change the y-intercept to 100,000. And then I'm going to change the x-intercept to, here the x-intercept is just over 2,000, 2,500. There you go. And now you can see the demand curve, right? Again, the y-intercept is 89,500 and the x-intercept is just over 2,000, as you see over here, right? So that's our demand curve. Because quantity is on the x-axis, and this is a math program, I'm going to type x, little x, equal to the quantity that we are supplying, 1,084. So our supply curve is this vertical blue line, and our demand curve is this vertical, this downward sloping red line. I'm going to change the colors to both black. And then I'm going to click right here to find the equilibrium. Well, the equilibrium is 46,140, right? That's the number given up here, the equilibrium price. So the equilibrium price is equal to our sticker price. Now, so we got the initial equilibrium. This is what we know. This is what we normally experience, right? We have economic growth growing at 2.5%. We have inflation at 2.1%. We have our demand that we expect during this very stable period of economic growth. It's not too high. It's not too low. Inflation's not too high. Inflation's not too low. It's just right. Both are just right. And under those conditions, this is what we expect demand to be, right? So we're supplying just enough cars to keep our inventory and our price stable. And we want quantity supplied, the quantities that we're selling, to be 1,084, and we want our market price to be right around 46,140, right around list price. And then what we're going to do is we're going to monitor our inventory. Is our inventory high? If our inventory is high, that means demand is slowing. Is our inventory low? That means we have high demand, right? And we're going to see what firms do when they have a situation where they have high demand and where they have low demand. These firms really don't want their prices to change. They want the expectation that list price is price. Price is the price, right? And that helps explain why Keynesians assume prices are sticky in the short run. Now, at the end of the following quarter, total monthly WinZig inventory increased unexpectedly. What does that do? This is caused by what? Unexpectedly high inventory means a decrease in WinZig demand. Now we can put our cursor in one of these answer boxes, press enter, and we can make sure we got it right. And we did, right? Now to keep your inventory at your target price, which is 46,140, you're targeting that price, right? So if you look down here, demand has shifted in, right? Demand has shifted from the black to the blue. We have a new demand curve, right? And if we do nothing with our supply, if we don't do nothing with our supply, we started here initially. If demand decreases to this blue downward sloping line, we'd have to lower our price down below $40,000. And firms don't want to do that, right? Samsung didn't want to change the expectation of what price of their phones were, right? So instead, they gave you a free HGTV to keep the expectation of their phone price where it's at. So what the company does in response to this decrease in demand is it slows production. And it slows production by moving the supply curve from the black line to the blue line. So to keep your inventory at your target price, you want to target your price. You want to keep price at your list or your sticker price, 46,140. Your company has to do what? Well, it has to decrease production. In economics, this means your company decreases WinZig supply. So in response to the decrease in demand, WinZig reduces its supply of cars. And how does it do that? Well, it doesn't want to furlough all of its workers, right? If it furloughs all of its workers, then it's not going to be able to make any cars. The blue curve would be at zero, right? It's not going to furlough workers with the most seniority. It wants to keep them around, right? They're the most productive workers. Furloughing workers with the second lowest seniority. Maybe not. Let's check our other choices. Having current employees work overtime. Well, it's not going to want current employees to work overtime because then supply is going to be greater than was initially. And that's going to push prices down even farther. bringing back some of its furloughed workers. Well, if it brings back some furloughed workers, that means supply is going to be more than what it was. And that's going to push down prices. Now, it could furlough workers with the least seniority. It's not going to hire new employees, because if it hires new employees, again, it's going to produce more cars than it did previously, which is going to pull down the equilibrium price even more. If it does no change in the number of employees, then really they're not really changing the supply at all, and that's going to pull the market price down, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to furlough workers with the least seniority. Taking this action maintains a sufficient inventory and keeps the WinZig price at what? Well, let's copy this demand curve in and then copy in our new supply curve. It has an output of 846. Now I'm going to change these colors to both blue so you can see it better. Now at the initial equilibrium, where the economy has grown steadily and inflation has no tendency to rise above where it's at or go below where it's at, the price was 46,140 at this level of output. At this new lower level of output of only 846 cars, the price is the same it was before, right? So this is how the company maintains stable prices. And this is why Keynesians in macroeconomics, part of the reason why Keynesian economics says prices are sticky in the short run. Firms don't really want to lower their prices. So what they do is they scale back production to keep the equilibrium price near their list. So the price is still 46,140. At the end of the following quarter, so this is maybe quarter 2 of 2023, this is quarter 3, and maybe this is quarter 4, right? At the end of the following quarter, you observe a further increase in WinZig inventory. So what we didn't really have an effect on bringing inventory back to normal levels. We have cars parked on the street near our dealerships, or they're piling up at our factories. When business is slow, car companies will see, if they don't adjust production levels and they keep producing the same number of cars, they're going to see the cars piling up literally on lots near the factory. When that happens, they got to do what? They got to scale back production. So this drop is caused by a decrease in WinZig demand. So it's a further drop in WinZig demand. To keep your inventory at your target, again, you want to keep your targeting a list price of 46,140, right? Your company has to do what? It has to decrease production. Again, in economics, this means your company decreases WinZig supply by what? Well, it's already furloughed the first workers, right? It's not going to furlough all of its workers. It's not going to fire them all. It's not going to lay them off temporarily. It's not going to hire new employees. It's not going to have current employees work overtime. Those two things would increase production, and that would pull prices down. It's not going to furlough all of its workers because it still wants to produce cars, right, at this red line. It already furloughed the workers with the least seniority. It does not want to furlough the workers with the most seniority. It's not going to bring back some furloughed workers. It wants to change the number of employees or the hours they work. It wants to change that, right? So that's not the choice. So it must be the second least seniority, the workers with the second least seniority, right? And notice when we put this new demand curve in here, and we put in this new supply curve, and we change the color to red, the price is being kept constant at what? 46,140. Right? That's what the goal of the firm is in the short run. When they see inventories piling up, they scale back production to keep a normal level of inventory and to maintain their list price. Okay, so to figure out what's going on here, right, you have a massive drop off in demand. Your demand curve shifted in twice. You had to scale back production. You went from 3 shifts to 2 shifts to 1 shift, right? So you decide to do some research. It reveals that the yield curve, when the economy is slowing, the yield curve tends to invert. An inverted yield curve, normally the yield curve is where a bond with 2 years of maturity has an interest rate that is lower than a bond that has a 10-year maturity. So a 10-year maturity bond might have a 5% yield normally. And a 2-year bond might have a yield of, say, 2%. 2% is lower than 5%. And so as maturity increases under normal conditions, the yield curve slopes up. But when we go into recession, what happens is the 10-year yield might drop to, say, 2%. And the 2-year yield might go to 3% annually. Now, the 2-year yield is higher than a 10-year, and we call that an inverted yield curve. And that tends to happen during a recession. It reveals that the yield curve is inverting. The tip spread is related, where the yield curve involves treasuries, like, a similar type of bond, like, say, government treasuries, where they're conventional. The 2-year treasury versus the 10-year treasury, right? We're not talking about treasury, a 2-year treasury and a 10-year corporate bond. We're talking about both being treasuries and both being conventional. Well, the tip spread is something similar, but with the tip spread, you want to compare a conventional yield interest rate on an investment in a treasury. That's what a yield is, right? So you want to compare the yield on, say, the 10-year conventional bond to the yield on what's called a TIPS bond. TIPS stands for Treasury Inflation Protected Security. These were introduced, I think, in the 80s or 90s as a result of the inflation that was going on in the 70s. But what TIPS is you have these coupon payments, right? And if the coupon is, for example, $100 every 6 months, and if inflation is 0, then every 6 months you'll get a $100 payment. If inflation is a problem, say inflation is 10% a year. Well, this August, I got $100. And if inflation is 10% over the course of a year, 3 payments from now, my coupon next August would be 10% higher. $100 plus 10%. 10% of $100 is $10. $10 plus $100 is $110. So TIPS adjust your coupon payments for inflation. So the way it works in the market, very savvy investors, if they think inflation is going to be a problem, then they start buying TIPS and their price goes higher. When the price goes higher, the yield goes lower. So a TIPS in an inflation environment is going to be very low relative to a conventional. And that spread between the conventional yield and the TIPS bond yield, that spread is called the TIPS spread. And that tends to widen. That tends to widen when inflation is going to be a problem. When inflation is not going to be a problem, when the economy starts to slow, the TIPS spread goes to 0. As the economy expands and has more robust growth, the more robust the growth, the more rapid the growth, the wider the TIPS spread gets. When the economy goes into recession, demand generally falls, aggregate demand falls. Any inflationary pressures that existed disappear. So the TIPS spread goes to 0. So we're headed to recession. Unemployment's rising. The yield curve is inverting. The TIPS spread is what? it's decreasing towards zero. Inflation is declining. Economic growth would be declining. Maybe it's negative, right? If GDP is declining, economic growth would be negative. And then unemployment would be rising. Unemployment would be rising. So let's just check to see if we got these right. And it looks like we got them all right. So generally what happens when demand for a product collapses like it is here, right? When it's collapsing, the yield curve is inverting. The tip spread is going to zero. Inflation is declining. Economic growth turns negative. GDP today is lower than what it was a year ago. And the unemployment rate is rising. Now, from research, you conclude that the economy is what? In recession. I would pick in a recession, not in a robust expansion, not in a modest expansion. Growing at an anemic rate near zero. I would say it's in a recession, right? If this were all going on. And this has been causing WINZIG inventory to rise during the year, which is a result of decreased WINZIG demand. WINZIG demand during this recession is given below. So we're in a full-blown recession, right? We're in a full-blown recession. Demand has collapsed. Now it's down here, right? This green line down here. Demand has collapsed. So let's put this demand curve into Desmos. Demand has really collapsed. And so this is now zero. I'm going to change the color to this. I'm going to change it to green. So now we're down here, right? Production can't get lower than zero. You can't make negative cars, right? You can have 0 cars, 1 car, 2 cars. You can't have negative 1 car. So you can't get supply any lower than it is, right? At this x equals 0. It can't get any lower. So supply here is 0. Now, let's go ahead and hit enter here to see if we got these other ones correct. And we did. Now, according to this demand curve, right? If I change this x equals 0 to x equal 1, right? Now x is equal to 1. The highest price a consumer is willing to pay for this car is $26,100. Right? So I plug 1 into this equation because we're talking about the person that has the highest willingness to pay, the first person in line, the LeBron James consumer. 40 times 1 is 40. Subtracting that from our intercept is 26,100, right? That's the highest, that's the person with the highest willingness to pay. That's what they're willing to pay. The most they're willing to pay for a WINZIG car in this economy that went into a deep recession, right? Now that is below, it is less than the WINZIG sticker price. The WINZIG sticker price is 46,140, right? This is much lower than that. As a result, your company does what? It has to do what? It furloughs the rest of its workers, right? It furloughs the rest of its workers. It temporarily lays them off. Now, the problem with furloughing workers is the reason why you want to do your most productive senior employees last is because when you lay them off, when they're laid off, they might decide to go work for another company. And that's why you want to lay off your most experienced, most productive workers last, right? Because you're hoping this is temporary and you can bring it back. The longer this drags out, the more likely these workers are going to move to a new state, right? Where maybe the economy is doing better. In economics, this is modeled as WINZIG supply decreasing to the vertical green line. And during this recession, your firm is producing 0 new WinZigs each month. In this situation, you're not producing any cars, and your cars are sitting on lots going unsold because you don't want to lower your price below your list or your sticker price. And your sticker price is $46,140. And the person with the highest willingness to pay is willing to pay at most $26,100. So you're kind of stuck. Do you bite the bullet and eliminate your inventory by selling all the cars at $26,100? The above model partially explains why prices are sticky. Firms want to keep those prices high. Demand and supply are still at work. As demand shifts in, you shift in your supply. So demand and supply are still working, right? But it's working in a way where as demand decreases, firms reduce their production by laying off workers in stages. This means that under free markets, firms that make physical goods add workers to increase production and subtract workers to decrease production to keep prices constant over the short run. And you see this with many different types of goods: cell phones, cars,